Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, often in the most painful ways. I never imagined that my golden years, the time I had worked so hard to enjoy, would turn into a battle against the very people I had loved and nurtured all my life. At 65, I live in a modest suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of a medium-sized city. My home is simple, but it's mine, filled with memories of a life well lived. I once owned a small grocery store, the kind where you knew every regular by name, where a neighbor's preference for dark roast over medium blend was as familiar as an old friend's laugh. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that put food on the table, sent my children to college, and provided me with a modest but comfortable nest egg when I finally retired. I was content, ready to enjoy the peace and quiet I had earned. Then last year, everything changed. The diagnosis came like a thunderclap: Alzheimer's disease. It wasn't a complete shock. I had noticed the small lapses, the occasional forgetfulness. Still, hearing it confirmed by a doctor felt like watching a door slowly close on the life I had known. My children, 2 sons and a daughter, along with my younger brother, rallied around me. They reminded me to take my medication, checked in regularly, and offered their help without hesitation. In those moments, I believed we were unshakable, a family bound by love. Looking back now, I see how blind I was. Just a week ago, everything unraveled in a way I never could have imagined. That evening, I had invited my family over for what I thought would be a simple, heartwarming gathering. My children, their spouses, my grandchildren, everyone I loved was there. We shared stories, laughter, and the familiar comfort of being together. After a while, I stepped out for a short walk, something I often did to clear my mind. But when I returned, something felt off. The usual hum of conversation had moved to the kitchen, but the tone was different, low, urgent, secretive. I heard my name, spoken in hushed voices. Instinctively, I paused at the front door just out of sight. My eldest son's voice was the clearest. "We should move him into a place that can handle all his needs," he said, his tone firm, almost businesslike. "The sooner the better. That way, we can manage things without him interfering." A sickening chill ran down my spine. Then came my daughter's voice, the one I had always trusted the most, the one filled with warmth and kindness. Except this time, it was ice cold. "He'll just be a burden eventually," she said. "And we might as well make sure the inheritance is settled. Could we enhance the dose of that drug? Make his disease progress faster? Then we could move him to a nursing home as soon as possible." I stopped breathing. Then my brother, my own flesh and blood, the man I had trusted my entire life, spoke as if agreeing to an investment strategy. "Exactly," he said. "We can't afford to wait until he's too far gone to make rational decisions. Let's sort out the will and the finances now." The words sliced through me. The medication they had been so diligent about? They were manipulating it, not to help me, but to accelerate my decline, to steal my independence, to take everything I had worked for before I even had the chance to fight back. I felt nauseous. These were my children, my family, the same people I had sacrificed for, given loans to, helped with college tuition, assisted in buying their first homes. And now, they were treating me like an old, broken thing to be disposed of as quickly as possible. The conversation continued, their voices blending into one conspiratorial murmur. "We can tell him it's for his own safety," my son added, "that we're worried about him living alone." I quietly closed the door and walked away, the betrayal pressing down on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I wandered the neighborhood, the cool air doing little to clear the storm raging inside me. When I finally returned, they had dispersed throughout the house, their smiles easy, their masks firmly in place. I forced myself to act normal, thanking them for coming, nodding along to their words, playing the role of the oblivious old man. But inside I was burning. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying their words over and over, trying to understand how the people I had loved so deeply could turn so heartless. But by morning, my grief had hardened into something else: resolve. I might be aging, but I was not weak. My first call was to my lawyer, a man I had trusted for years. As I told him everything, he listened intently, understanding the gravity of what I was saying. We scheduled an appointment for the following week. He would help me rewrite my will, secure my finances, and take steps to protect myself. In the meantime, I had to keep up the act. My son called me twice that week, his voice filled with false concern, checking in as if he weren't plotting to strip me of everything. My daughter came by with groceries, smiling as she told me she just wanted to make sure I was eating well, when in reality, she was assessing how much time she had before moving me out. Then came my brother's invitation to lunch. The moment he sat across from me at the diner, I knew this was no casual meal. He leaned in, his voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "It must be tough living alone," he said, watching me carefully. "You sure you're handling everything okay?" I nodded, playing the role they expected of me. He pressed further, subtly steering the conversation toward assisted living. He avoided the phrase nursing home, as if choosing gentler words would make his betrayal easier to swallow. That afternoon my daughter showed up again, this time with brochures. "I really think this would be best for you, Dad," she said, her tone soft, persuasive. "They take care of everything. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I played my part, acting confused, forgetful, anxious, feeding into the very image they wanted to see. She latched onto it immediately. "We just don't want a crisis," she murmured, flipping through the pages. But I knew the truth. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were worried about securing their inheritance before I could protect it. Finally, the day of my lawyer's appointment arrived. I drove myself there, a small but deliberate act of defiance. Sitting across from him, I laid everything out. The overheard conversation, their attempts to manipulate my medication, their eagerness to take control of my assets. My lawyer listened carefully, then leaned forward and said something that made my heart steady for the first time in days. "You're not alone in this," he assured me, "and we're going to make sure they don't take a single thing from you." At that moment I knew. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them win. They thought they had me cornered, but they had underestimated me. And soon, they would realize their mistake. Life has a way of revealing its harshest truths in the most unexpected moments. I never imagined that the people I had loved, raised, and supported would one day become the architects of my betrayal. But fate has a cruel sense of irony, and it chose to open my eyes in the most painful way possible. At 65, I live a quiet life in a modest suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of a medium-sized city. My home is not extravagant, but it holds years of memories, the kind that money cannot buy. I once owned a small grocery store, a place where customers became friends, and every aisle held stories of the people who walked through it. It was never a path to great wealth, but it provided a comfortable life, allowing me to raise my family with dignity and retire with a modest nest egg. Life up until recently had been peaceful. Then came the diagnosis: Alzheimer's. The word alone was enough to shake the foundation of my existence. I had always been independent, sharp, and self-sufficient. But suddenly, my future became uncertain, my mind something I could no longer fully trust. My children, 2 sons and a daughter, along with my brother, initially surrounded me with concern and support. They checked in regularly, reminded me to take my medication, and assured me that I would never face this battle alone. In those moments, I believed them. I believed in the strength of our bond. I was wrong. It happened one evening when I had invited my family over for dinner, hoping for a night of warmth and laughter. The house was filled with familiar voices, the comforting sounds of family. After a while, I stepped out for a short walk, something I often did to clear my thoughts. When I returned, something felt different. The usual hum of conversation had moved to the kitchen, but this time, the voices were hushed, urgent. Instinct told me not to announce my presence. Instead, I stood by the door listening. "We should move him into a place that can handle all his needs," my eldest son said. "The sooner the better. That way we can manage things without him interfering." The words hit me like a slap, but what followed was worse. "He'll just be a burden eventually." My daughter's voice, cold and detached, cut through the air. "And we might as well make sure the inheritance is settled. Could we enhance the dose of that drug? Make his disease progress faster? Then we could move him to the nursing home as soon as possible." A wave of nausea rolled through me. "Exactly," my brother added. "We can't afford to wait until he's too far gone to make rational decisions. Let's sort out the will and finances now." I stood there, frozen in disbelief. These were my children, my family, the people I had supported through every hardship, the ones I had sacrificed for time and time again. They were not looking out for me. They were plotting against me. The medication they had been so eager to remind me to take? It was a tool to hasten my decline. My well-being was an obstacle in their path to securing their inheritance. They continued their conversation, their voices filled with an unsettling casualness, as if discussing weekend plans. We can tell him it's for his own safety, my son added, that we're worried about him living alone. Their agreement was unanimous. The betrayal was complete. I quietly closed the door and walked away, my legs carrying me aimlessly down the street, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. By the time I returned, they were scattered around the house, their masks firmly in place, oblivious to the fact that their secret had unraveled. I forced myself to smile, to act as though nothing had changed. But inside, something in me had hardened. That night, sleep never came. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words replaying in my mind like a cruel echo. By morning, my grief had transformed into something else, determination. They had underestimated me. That would be their first mistake. My first call was to my lawyer, a man I had trusted for years. I told him everything. He listened, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief, before outlining the steps we needed to take. The first move was revising my will, significantly reducing the inheritances of those who had plotted against me. Then, we created a new power of attorney, ensuring that only a neutral third party, someone with no personal stake in my estate, could make medical decisions on my behalf if I ever became incapacitated. Finally, we established a living trust that explicitly stated my right to remain in my home for as long as I was medically capable, with only a certified physician having the authority to determine otherwise. With these protections in place, I set the stage for what would come next. I invited my family over for a meeting that weekend, keeping the invitation vague. They arrived wary, their expressions guarded. My daughter's eyes darted around, as if expecting an ambush. My eldest son forced a smile, but his posture was rigid. My brother, always the most calculating, slinked in last, offering only a half-hearted greeting. Once they were seated in my living room, I stood by the fireplace, my updated legal documents placed on the coffee table in plain sight. I began calmly, explaining that I had been reviewing my will and healthcare directives. The moment I mentioned taking extra precautions, I saw my son's jaw tighten. "Why now?" he demanded. "Did something happen?" I met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes," I said. "Something did happen. I overheard some conversations." The room fell into a suffocating silence. My daughter fidgeted with her sleeve. My brother suddenly found the carpet fascinating. I laid everything bare. The conversation in the kitchen, their plans, their intentions. I watched their faces as the reality of what I knew settled in. My brother tried to feign concern, his voice trembling under the weight of the truth. My daughter's eyes welled with fake tears as she insisted they would never harm me. My son, ever the aggressor, demanded to know who had lied to me. That was when I revealed that I had heard every word with my own ears. The color drained from my daughter's face. My brother sat in silence. My son clenched his fists but said nothing. Then my mother, who had been sitting quietly throughout it all, spoke. Her voice, filled with quiet disappointment, cut through the tension like a blade. She expressed her disbelief, her horror at the thought of forcing me into a home when I was still perfectly capable. At that moment, the last of their pretenses crumbled. One by one, they tried to backtrack, offering excuses, pleading for understanding. But it was too late. "I've changed my will," I told them, my voice calm but resolute. "The distribution of my estate will now reflect each person's genuine care and respect for me, not their sense of entitlement." The aftermath played out predictably. My son suddenly became overly attentive, showing up with expensive gift baskets and offers to help. My daughter called daily, her voice thick with rehearsed remorse, admitting she had financial troubles and had hoped my estate might solve them. My brother tried a different tactic, hosting a family barbecue, pretending to mend things, until he pulled me aside and suggested I reconsider my will. I only had one response. "Family doesn't conspire to steal from you. I said. Family doesn't plot behind your back. On your own terms. Over time, their outrage turned to guilt, then to reluctant acceptance. My final decision was clear. My estate would largely go to charity, with only minimal shares left for my children, contingent on their behavior. They called me cruel, selfish. They left voicemails insisting that blood should come before strangers. But their entitlement only reaffirmed that I had made the right choice. This was never about revenge. It was about protecting myself, about ensuring that those who truly cared, not those who merely stood to gain, were the ones who would benefit from my legacy. Sometimes betrayal comes from those closest to us, but it is never too late to take back control and secure your future.